The sea breeze, usually a comfort, felt like a cold whisper of judgment on the holiday pier. My daughter, Julia, stood before me, a practiced smile on her face, but her eyes held a predatory glint. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she cooed, extending a cheap, crinkled lottery ticket. "For your share of the coastal cottage, of course. Don't say we never give you anything." Passers-by, enjoying their Monday morning stroll, glanced our way, their gazes lingering on the small, garish slip of paper. The injustice was as sharp and immediate as a broken shell underfoot, a public dismissal of 3 decades of my life. My inheritance, my home, reduced to a dollar gamble. I took the ticket, my fingers brushing hers. Her touch was cold, detached. The sun, usually warm on my skin, seemed to mock me, illuminating the tiny price tag still clinging to the lottery scratcher. The holiday gifting had turned into a cruel arena. People continued past us, their cheerful chatter a stark contrast to the silence that fell between Julia and me. She expected a reaction, perhaps a protest, but I gave her nothing. My expression remained neutral, impassive, a retired postman who'd seen too much to be surprised. But that was only half the truth. Tucked deep in my jacket pocket, a faded teal-colored boat brochure crackled slightly, a promise concealed. The image showed a modest but sturdy catamaran cutting through turquoise water, a stark mental contrast to the lottery ticket in my hand. That brochure represented more than a dream. It was a blueprint, a quiet defiance to the storm Julia was brewing. I pressed my lips into a thin line. She thought she'd delivered a crushing blow, unaware of the currents swirling beneath my placid surface. Back at the beach cottage, the familiar scent of salt and old wood greeted me, a scent that had been home for over 30 years. Julia's husband, Mark, already had his laptop open on the kitchen island, tapping away. He didn't even look up as I entered. "Dad, we were just discussing the market," Julia announced, pouring herself a fresh cup of coffee, ignoring my presence. "Coastal properties are hot right now, especially something with this much acreage." Their voices, usually hushed, now seemed to echo, filling the small space with their entitlement. "With crunch the numbers," Mark chimed in, finally glancing at me with a practiced, condescending smile. "This place, with 3 acres and that amazing waterfront, could easily fetch $2.7 million. After some necessary renovations, of course." He gestured vaguely around the cozy, lived-in kitchen, implying it was outdated and undesirable. My Agnes had loved this kitchen, had spent hours baking here, the very air still holding faint echoes of her laughter, and the aroma of cinnamon. "And we're just trying to be practical, Dad," Julia added, her tone saccharine. "At 69, this house is a lot. The upkeep, the stairs. We found a lovely assisted living facility inland. Very peaceful. You'll be comfortable." Comfortable? I thought, meaning far away from the life I'd built, far from the sea, far from Agnes's memories. They'd already mentally spent the $2.7 million, offering me the paltry $1 lottery ticket as my due. From that vast sum, I walked past them, feeling the smooth, worn wood of the kitchen counter beneath my fingertips. Each groove, each faint stain, told a story. Julia's voice followed me. "It's for the best. You're getting older, Dad. It's time for us to step in. Make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of, she meant while they took everything. I could hear the rustle of papers as Mark printed something, probably a property appraisal. The metallic tang of ambition filled the air, replacing the familiar comfort of sea air and Agnes's faint scent. Later that afternoon, a real estate agent arrived, a polished woman in a sharp suit. Julia and Mark paraded her through the cottage, pointing out potential and opportunities. She nodded, scribbled notes, her eyes already calculating commission. "A fantastic investment opportunity," I heard her say, her voice bright and professional, as they stood in Agnes's old art studio, now marked for conversion. The vibrant teal of the boat brochure in my pocket felt like a private reminder, rebellious flag against their clinical invasion. "Of course, we need Dad to say a few things," Julia mentioned, her voice lowered, but I caught her from the living room. Standard procedure, you know, to ensure a smooth transition. Smooth transition for whom? I wondered. The salt spray from the nearby ocean kissed the windows, blurring the view. Much like their words blurred the truth. They were so confident, so dismissive of the old man they thought I was. That evening, the cottage, usually a sanctuary of quiet, felt invaded. Julia and Mark discussed floor plans for their future living room, right where Agnes and I had shared countless evenings. "We'll knock out this wall," Mark declared, gesturing wildly. "Open concept, perfect for entertaining." I sat by the window, watching the waves, a silent observer. But their plans were built on sand, not solid ground. I remembered Agnes's quiet strength, how she'd always navigated life's challenges with grace and foresight. Her small silver locket, a family heirloom, lay cold against my chest beneath my shirt, a tangible link to her wisdom. It carried not just her memory, but a secret, a small inscription only I knew how to read. Julia never even asked about it. She was too busy eyeing the antique furniture, calculating its resale value. The next morning, a Monday, they began sorting through my belongings, ostensibly to help me pack for the new place. Julia held up a dusty photo album. "Oh, look, Dad, your old postman uniform. So quaint." She didn't bother to open the album, to see the faces, the memories. Instead, she tossed it onto a donate pile. Each item was just a thing to be categorized, not a piece of a life. The air felt thick with their brisk efficiency, a stark contrast to the slow, deliberate pace of my own memories. Mark, meanwhile, discovered a stack of old bills in my desk drawer. "Dad, you still have these ancient utility statements?" he scoffed, waving a paper from 2008. "Everything's online now, you know." He failed to notice the carefully dated, meticulously organized envelopes, each a testament to decades of careful stewardship. My life, my routines, were nothing but inefficient relics to them. Their dismissiveness was a constant, grating hum. I excused myself, heading to my small study, a room they hadn't yet optimized. The scent of old paper and dust motes dancing in a single shaft of sunlight brought a strange comfort. It was here, amongst these forgotten things, that my real work lay. I pulled open a hidden drawer, revealing a small, locked metal box. Inside lay not money, but documents, a different kind of wealth, quietly waiting. The box contained, among other things, a specific trust document and a series of notarized letters. Each bore the precise date and official stamp. Julia and Mark saw me as an old man, adrift in a sea of memories. They didn't see the retired postman who knew how to sort, how to deliver, and how to ensure the right message reached the right recipient at the right time. The coastal cottage, the asset at stake, was my anchor, but also their unsuspecting trap. "Dad, are you just going to hide in there all day?" Julia called from the kitchen, her voice cutting through the quiet study. "We need to decide what to do with the big armchair. It won't fit in your new room." Her tone was impatient, a clear dismissal of my needs or feelings. It was an inventory, not a conversation. My choice was irrelevant to their grand design. The following Sunday, they hosted a farewell brunch for me at a popular beachfront restaurant packed with holidaymakers. My humiliation was to be public, visible. Julia, dressed in a vibrant teal dress, a color I usually associated with peaceful ocean depths, now twisted, beamed at guests. "Dad's moving on to a lovely new chapter," she announced, raising a mimosa. Mark smiled broadly, shaking hands, playing the dutiful son-in-law. They had invited distant relatives and some of my old neighbors, all of whom offered well-meaning but pitying glances. "It's for the best, Peter." Mrs. Henderson, a kind soul from next door, whispered, squeezing my hand. "You'll be looked after." Her words, intended to comfort, felt like a concession of defeat. Julia had orchestrated this spectacle, painting me as a helpless elder, needing her care, subtly reinforcing their narrative to everyone present. A cousin, unfamiliar with the details, asked innocently, "So, Peter, what are your plans for the cottage?" Julia quickly interjected, "Oh, we're taking care of everything for Dad. It's too much for him to manage now. He'll be much happier closer to town." She didn't let me answer, effectively silencing me, her words dripping with false concern. The delicious aroma of fresh seafood couldn't mask the bitter taste in my mouth. I simply nodded, forcing a small smile, playing my part as the docile, grateful father. No one questioned Julia's narrative. Why would they? She was young, vibrant, successful. I was old, retired, supposedly declining. The contrast was stark, visible to all. The vibrant teal of Julia's dress shimmered in the afternoon sun, a cruel parody of the ocean outside, which represented my true, unspoken desires and the hidden plan I held close. The lottery ticket still in my wallet felt like a branded mark of their contempt. $1 for a lifetime of memories, for a legacy. But Julia and Mark had miscalculated. They saw a fading man. I saw a precise, retired postman, accustomed to delivering inconvenient truths. What they perceived as my helplessness was, in fact, my greatest weapon. My thoughts drifted to Agnes, a quiet compass guiding my resolve. Later, as the brunch wound down, Julia handed me a small, wrapped box. A little something extra, Dad, for your new adventure. Inside was a generic gift certificate for a local gardening store. My new adventure apparently involved tending petunias in a sterile courtyard, far from the crashing waves and the wild beauty of my own garden. It was another calculated insult, a token gesture designed to reinforce their control. Mark clapped me on the shoulder, his grip unpleasantly firm. We're going to put the cottage on the market next week, Dad. The real estate agent thinks it will go quickly, possibly for over $2.5 million. Think of all the amenities you'll enjoy at the facility. His words, meant to entice, only cemented my resolve. The sun glinted off the ocean, reflecting a blinding light directly into my eyes. But I did not flinch. I merely smiled, a silent, knowing smile that they completely missed. They were too busy congratulating themselves, basking in the glow of their perceived victory. The sounds of waves crashing against the shore were at constant rhythm, a heartbeat telling a different story, one of patience and inevitable return. The true value of the coastal cottage wasn't just in its market price. It was in the leverage it provided, the legal knots I'd tied years ago. As the brunch finally ended and people began to disperse, I overheard Mark talking animatedly to a distant cousin. Honestly, it was getting ridiculous. He wanted to buy some crazy catamaran with the proceeds. Can you imagine? An old man like that out on the open sea? He laughed, a loud, dismissive sound that echoed over the lingering chatter. The boat brochure in my pocket felt warm now, a harbinger of a future they couldn't fathom. The drive back from the restaurant was silent. Mark's mocking laughter about the catamaran echoed in my head, a stark reminder of their profound disrespect. They saw my dreams not as aspirations, but as signs of senility, a convenient excuse to justify their theft. The teal brochure, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a secret weapon, its bright colors a silent promise of a future they had no part in. They thought they were closing a chapter, but I was just turning the page to the climax. That evening, they cornered me in the living room. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, mirroring the darkness of their intentions. Mark placed the sheaf of papers on the coffee table with a soft thud. "Dad, we need you to sign these," he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "It's just a formality to transfer the property title into a family trust. It simplifies things." Julia stood behind him, arms crossed, a silent, imposing enforcer. "Let me read it first," I said, reaching for the papers. Julia intercepted my hand. "Dad, it's all legalese. Our lawyer, Mr. Jennings, drew it up himself. It's standard. We're just trying to get everything in order before the sale closes." Her impatience was a thin veneer over a core of sheer avarice. They didn't want me to read it. They wanted me to obey. The air grew thick with unspoken threats. I insisted, and with a dramatic sigh, she relinquished the document. It was a quit-claim deed. My eyes, trained by decades of reading fine print on mail, scanned the dense paragraphs. They were asking me to surrender all rights, title, and interest in my home for the grand sum of $1. The paper was still warm from their printer, the ink smelling faintly of chemicals and deceit. They were so close, they could taste the $2.7 million. Then I saw it, A small error in the legal description of the property, referencing an outdated survey from 1988, one that had been superseded by a 2003 revision after a boundary dispute. It was a minor but legally significant flaw. A better lawyer would have caught it. A small, cold smile touched my lips, unseen by them. Their haste, their supreme confidence in my incompetence, had made them sloppy. This was the first crack in their perfect plan. I let out a weary sigh, rubbing my eyes. It's all a bit much for me right now. I can't seem to focus on the words. I feigned the very confusion they expected. My head is spinning from that brunch. Can we please look at this in the morning when I'm fresh? Julia's jaw tightened, but she forced a saccharine smile. Of course, Dad. Get some rest. They exchanged a look, a mix of frustration and certainty. The old man was folding, just as they planned. The next afternoon, I went for a walk to clear my head, ending up on a familiar pier bench overlooking the water. The sea was calm, the sky a vast, indifferent blue. The same marina where Julia had handed me the lottery ticket. Further down the pier, I saw her and Mark, leaning against the railing, their figures silhouetted against the bright sun. They thought they were out of earshot, but the sea breeze has a way of carrying secrets. Julia's voice, sharp and clear, sliced through the gentle sound of the waves. He's stalling. He said he'd signed this morning. Now he's wandering off. If we don't get his signature by Friday, we lose the deposit on our new build. There was no trace of the concerned daughter. Only the cold calculus of a predator. We can't let him derail this. The betrayal was no longer just an act. It was a business transaction with a deadline. Mark's reply was even more chilling, his voice a low murmur that the wind carried directly to me. Relax. If he keeps playing games, we'll file the petition. Our lawyer says the competency hearing will be a formality. Dr. Evans already prepared his assessment based on everything you told him about Dad's. Memory lapses. The words landed like stones in my stomach. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were prepared to strip me of my sanity, my very identity, on paper. Sitting there on that public bench, the full scope of their cruelty washed over me. It was a meticulously planned campaign. The belittling gifts, the public pity party, the fabricated medical concerns. It was all evidence for a legal case against me. They weren't just greedy children. They were conspirators. The warm sea breeze suddenly felt like ice against my skin. The distant, mournful sound of a foghorn seemed to be tolling for the family I thought I had. But, in that moment of absolute clarity, there was no despair, only a cold, hard resolve. I thought of Agnes, my quiet compass, and her favorite saying, "The tide always turns, Peter. You just have to be patient enough to see it." She had known somehow that this day might come. Their plot wasn't just an attack on me. It was an insult to her memory, to the life we built together. And it would not stand. When I returned to the cottage, they were in the kitchen, casually browsing tile samples for their dream remodel on a tablet. "A nice sea glass green, don't you think?" Julia murmured, oblivious. The sheer domesticity of the scene, layered over their monstrous plan, was nauseating. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them design a future in a house they had not yet managed to steal. They didn't even notice me. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice calm, cutting through their conversation. They both looked up surprised. "I won't be signing anything until I've had my own legal counsel review it." It was the first time I had presented a direct, unequivocal challenge. The shift in the room's atmosphere was immediate, from casual entitlement to tense confrontation. The mask of familial concern was gone. Julia scoffed, a raw, ugly sound. "Your own lawyer? Who, Dad? You don't have a lawyer." "Don't be ridiculous. We are your family. We are trying to protect your assets." The word "your" was laced with sarcasm, as if the very idea of my ownership was a quaint fantasy she was tired of entertaining. "Stop being so difficult," she snapped, her voice rising. The frustration she'd been hiding was now on full display. "It's my property, and it's my right," I stated, my voice low but unwavering. I walked to the coffee table. picked up the quitclaim deed, and folded it neatly. I didn't tear it. I didn't make a scene. I simply took back the instrument of my own surrender. Turning my back on their stunned, furious faces, I walked into my study and closed the door, leaving them in a silence more profound than any argument. Inside my sanctuary, I didn't reach for the phone. I knelt and opened the small, locked metal box. The real power lay here. I laid the documents across my old wooden desk, the original, mortgage-free deed to the coastal cottage, the establishing papers for the Agnes B. Miller Maritime Trust, and a series of crisp, notarized letters. Each official stamp was a bulwark against their greed, a testament to Agnes's foresight. This was my arsenal. My fingers found the key document, a notarized assignment of beneficial interest. It was a legal mechanism Agnes and our lawyer had devised years ago, a silent guardian for the cottage. I read the critical clause aloud to the empty room. In the event of an attempt to transfer the primary deed under duress or through demonstrated malfeasance, all beneficial interest shall be immediately and irrevocably assigned to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. It was an inheritance bypass, a poison pill for greed, but it required one final step to be activated. My signature, witnessed and notarized, on a separate activation letter. This was the moment. The plan was no longer defensive. It was time to attack. I needed a trustworthy witness, someone outside the family's sphere of influence. My thoughts turned to my kind neighbor, Eleanor Henderson, the woman Julia had so easily manipulated at the brunch. Her integrity was unimpeachable. My notary first plan was now in motion. I picked up the phone, my hand steady. "Eleanor? Peter Miller. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Her voice was warm, tinged with concern. "Not at all, Peter. Is everything okay?" I kept my tone light. "Everything's fine. I just need to have a document witnessed at the bank tomorrow morning, and I was hoping you might be able to help. A simple signature is all." She agreed without hesitation, a small act of kindness that would unknowingly trigger an avalanche. The next morning, briefcase in hand, I met Julia in the hallway. Her face was a thundercloud. "Where do you think you're going?" she demanded. "The real estate agent is coming at noon to put the for sale sign on the lawn. You need to be here." Her attempt to command me was pathetic. She was issuing orders in a house that was, for a few more hours at least, still mine. "I have an appointment at the bank," I said, brushing past her toward the door. "I won't be long." The cool morning air felt electric on my skin. I didn't load back at her sputtering protests. For the first time in months, I felt the wind at my back, not in my face. The tide was finally, definitively turning. I was no longer the victim in their drama. I was the director of its final, shocking act. At the town's small credit union, Eleanor was waiting. The notary, a young woman named Sarah, led us to her desk. I presented the letter of activation for the Agnes B. Miller Maritime Trust. Eleanor read nothing, simply doing as I asked, signing her name as witness. I signed mine. Sarah checked our IDs, then pressed her official seal onto the paper. The solid, percussive thump of the notary stamp was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was done. As we left, Eleanor placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Peter, I don't want to pry, but Julia has been telling everyone how worried she is about you." I gave her a genuine smile, the first in a long time. "Don't you worry about me, Eleanor. Everything is finally being taken care of." My words held a double meaning she couldn't possibly grasp, but her nod was one of relief. She thought I had finally acquiesced. Driving back down my street, I saw it. A garish, oversized for sale sign had been hammered into my front lawn. The agent's smiling, predatory face beamed from the plastic, a monument to my children's hubris. They hadn't even waited for my signature on the deed. Their assumption of victory was absolute. I parked across the street for a moment, simply observing this final, egregious insult. The calm before the storm was officially over. With the notarized, activated documents secured in my briefcase, I walked up the path. Julia and Mark were on the porch, sipping coffee, admiring their handiwork. They looked like the new lords of the manor. "There you are, Dad," Julia said, her voice a triumphant purr. "Doesn't it look wonderful? The beginning of a new chapter for all of us?" I looked from the sign to her smug face, to the house Agnes and I had called home. But she had no idea whose new chapter was about to begin. I set my briefcase down on the porch railing with a soft click. The sound seemed to break their reverie. "The sign is premature," I said, my voice carrying the weight of the morning's events. Mark chuckled, a dismissive, condescending sound. "Don't be sentimental, Peter. It's just business. We have a buyer offering $2.6 million, sight unseen. We need to move." He spoke of my home as if it were a stock to be traded, a number on a ledger. "You've made a terrible mistake," I told them, my gaze steady, unwavering. "Both of you." I opened the briefcase and removed 2 envelopes. One was thick, addressed to the lawyer at St. Jude. The other was for them. Julia's smile finally faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then annoyance. "What is this? More games?" "We're done with games, Dad. Sign the deed or we proceed with the competency hearing on Monday. It's your choice." I handed her the envelope. She tore it open impatiently. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of the notarized activation letter for the Agnes B. Miller Maritime Trust. She scanned it, her brow furrowed in confusion. Mark leaned over her shoulder, reading along. "What the hell is the Agnes B. Miller Maritime Trust?" he muttered. The words stick with suspicion. He'd never bothered to learn my late wife's middle name, a small but telling detail. I explained, my voice as calm and measured as a tide chart. "It's a charitable remainder trust Agnes and I established in 2011. It held a reversionary interest in this property." I used the precise legal terms, watching as comprehension slowly, painfully dawned on their faces. "The trust documents contain a very specific clause, an inheritance bypass, triggered by any attempt to seize the asset under duress or through demonstrated malfeasance, such as filing a fraudulent competency hearing." Julia's face had gone pale, the vibrant teal of her dress now seeming sickly against her skin. That's not possible. Our lawyer did a title search. There's no trust on the deed." Her voice was a thin, reedy whisper. She looked at Mark, her confidence shattering like sea glass. "He's bluffing," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was staring at the notary's seal on the letter, a mark of undeniable, official power. It was a springing interest, not a present one. It wouldn't appear on a standard search, I clarified, enjoying the legal terminology that was now a weapon against them. "It only comes into existence upon the fulfillment of certain conditions. Your actions, your greed, you fulfill those conditions. This morning, when you threatened me with that hearing, the document I had notarized irrevocably assigns 100% of the beneficial interest in this property to the hospital. Not to me, not to you." The silence on the porch was absolute, broken only by the distant cry of a seagull. Julia stared at the paper in her hand as if it were a venomous snake. You gave away our inheritance? You gave away $2.7 million to strangers?" Her voice cracked, a mixture of disbelief and pure, raw fury. The hour was the most telling word of all. She had always seen it as hers, my life's work just a placeholder for her future wealth. "I didn't give it away," I corrected her gently. "You did. Your greed, your cruelty, your plan to have me declared incompetent, that was the trigger. Agnes and I made this plan to protect the home we loved from the very thing you became." The mention of her mother's name seemed to strike a nerve, a direct hit to her conscience, if he still had one. She flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Mark lunged for the envelope addressed to St. Jude. "We'll burn it. No one has to know," he snarled, his composure completely gone. He was a cornered animal now, his civilized mask stripped away. I simply held it out of his reach. "It's too late, Mark. The original is already on its way via certified mail. A copy has been emailed to their general counsel from a public library computer this morning. The process is irreversible. This is just a courtesy copy." The reality of their loss finally settled in. It was a physical thing, a weight that seemed to crush them. Julia sank onto the porch steps, the useless paper fluttering from her hand. Mark just stood there, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of impotent rage. They hadn't just lost the money. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted by the old senile man they had so profoundly underestimated. Their public humiliation was now private and far more devastating. I looked at the for sale sign on my lawn, a monument to their failed coup. "You'll need to remove that," I said, my voice flat. "The property now belongs to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Their lawyers will be in contact regarding the transition." "I have a lifetime tenancy agreement, of course." Agnes insisted on that part. "I would live out my days here, in my home by the sea." "They would get nothing." Julia looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears of rage, not remorse. "Why?" she whispered, the question hanging in the salty air. "Why would you do this to your own family?" The question was so absurd, so completely devoid of self-awareness, that I almost laughed. She still saw herself as the victim, even now. The lottery ticket she'd given me felt like a distant, pathetic memory from another lifetime. I didn't answer her question. It didn't deserve an answer. Instead, I picked at the small gardening gift certificate they had given me at the brunch. I held it out to her. "Here," I said, "for your new adventure." The echo of her own cruel words, delivered back to her in this moment of her total defeat, was the only judgment I needed to pass. Her face crumpled, the finality of her loss hitting her. Mark finally spoke, his voice a low growl. "You'll regret this, you old fool." But the threat was empty, toothless. They had no leverage, no power, no angle left to play. They had gambled everything on my perceived weakness, and they had lost spectacularly. The financial documents, the legal twist, the notarized assignment. It was a fortress I had built around myself, brick by legal brick, waiting for this very day. I turned my back on them then, on their rage and their ruin. I walked over to the garish for sale sign. The agent's smiling face mocked their failure. With a firm grip, I yanked the sign from the damp soil of my garden. The metal posts made a satisfying schlick sound as they came free. It was heavier than I expected, but my resolve gave me strength. The sea breeze picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees as if applauding. I dragged the sign to the edge of the property and let it fall face down in the dirt. A small, symbolic act of restoration. The public humiliation they had planned for me had been turned back on them, not in a crowded restaurant, but here, on the very land they had tried to steal. The pier, the brunch, the condescending gifts, it all led to this quiet, devastating conclusion. My planned vector had reached its destination. From my pocket, I pulled out the faded, teal-colored boat brochure. I unfolded it, the image of the catamaran a stark, beautiful promise against the backdrop of my reclaimed life. The quiet dream they had mocked was now a tangible possibility. The interest from the trust's investments would provide me with a comfortable income for life. More than enough for a boat, for travel, for peace. They had inadvertently funded my freedom. Julia was sobbing now, harsh, ugly sounds of pure self-pity. Mark was on his phone, likely speaking to their lawyer. A call that would bring him no comfort, only confirmation of his complete and utter defeat. I felt nothing for them. No pity, no anger, not even satisfaction. Only a profound sense of quiet, of a balance restored. The house felt like mine again, cleansed of their toxic ambition. I walked back to my front door, past their shattered forms on the porch, and went inside. The familiar scent of salt and old wood was a welcome embrace. I placed the boat brochure on the kitchen island, right where Mark's laptop had been, a symbol of my future, replacing the tool of his greed. Through the window, I could see the endless expanse of the ocean, calm and steady. Agnes would have approved. I walked into my study, the small room that had been my command center. The metal box was still open on my desk. I took out Agnes's small silver locket, the heirloom they had overlooked, and held it in my palm. The inscription inside was a simple Latin phrase, facta, non verba, deeds, not words. I closed the box, the metallic click echoing in the quiet house, and turned to lock the front door.